In the quiet part of Lancaster, California, where the desert air settles low in the evenings, lived a mother who carries most of her world on her shoulders. She was just a 33-year-old lady, and the kind of woman people described as steady. She had a gentle way of speaking, and a smile that came easily. She lived with her husband, Jossimar Cabrera, and their 3 children. People who knew her said she loved going through routine, but even in a life that seemed normal from the outside, there were small things only her closest family noticed, like a quiet heaviness in her voice some days, and that tired look she brushed off with a smile. She's the kind that rarely talks about her own struggles, choosing instead to focus on her children and the life she was trying to build for them. This is the story of Sheylla Cabrera. The mother of 3 was trying to keep her world steady as her friends adored her, her co-workers respected her, and even her family leaned on her warmth, the kind of daughter who called her mom just to check in, and the kind of friend who showed up no matter how tired she was. But people close to her knew there was more happening behind that front door. They said she had been carrying something heavy, something she didn't like to talk about. She told her mother she planned to report the verbal and physical abuse she'd been facing, which was supposed to be her first real step toward protecting herself, but she never got the chance. Then, on August 12th, 2025, Sheylla didn't show up for work, or call that she wasn't coming, or even answer her messages. The silence was sharp enough for her family to know something was wrong. Eventually, when deputies arrived at her home, they found her husband, but no sign of Sheylla. He told authorities she had left, probably walked out, that he didn't know where she was, but the story didn't add up. Not to her family, her friends, and not to investigators, who quickly noticed that something about the home felt off, and that same day, a missing person report was filed, which was the beginning of a case that would pull investigators deep into one of the most unsettling discoveries the area had seen in years. What no one knew yet was that the truth had already been recorded. A camera mounted on a nearby building had captured a moment investigators would later call chilling. In the footage, Sheylla's husband was seen dragging a large, heavy object wrapped in fabric out of their apartment. He was seen struggling with it, pulling it across the floor, directly toward his car. The footage wasn't the only sign, as something terrible had also happened. Days later, as detectives started mapping Jossimar's movements and monitoring his passport activity, they realized he was gone. He had left the United States with their 3 children and boarded a flight to Peru, his home country. Investigators now had a missing mother, an empty home, a husband who fled, and surveillance footage that looked more like the opening scene of a horror film. For 4 days, search teams combed the areas surrounding Lancaster. Even volunteers joined deputies, hoping Sheylla had simply gotten lost or left to clear her mind. But the truth was waiting miles away, in the Angeles National Forest, a rugged, steep, isolated stretch of land where missing cases often become impossible puzzles. But this time, the forest wasn't hiding a mystery, it was hiding the answer to the mystery. And then, on August 16th, the Montrose Search and Rescue Team found something over the edge of an embankment. A strange, tightly wrapped material, which didn't look like it belonged in the wilderness. But when the deputies got closer, they saw that the material looked similar to what they had seen in the surveillance footage. It has the same color, the same shape, and inside that wrapped bundle were human remains. The team called it in immediately, and investigators moved fast. The medical examiner would later confirm what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Sheylla Cabrera. It showed that Sheylla hadn't walked away. She hadn't left her home. She hadn't started a new life, but rather she had been taken, hidden, and left there. Although the cause of death had not yet been determined, and investigators were careful with their words, the evidence pointed towards something deliberate, which is violent, and probably something deeply personal. When the deputies notified her family, their reaction was heartbreak, which made her mother collapse when she heard. Her friends gathered at a vigil, speaking about who Sheylla had been. They described a woman who was gentle and kind, a woman who helped others without being asked, a mother who loved her children with every piece of her being. A friend who was happy all the time, despite the pain she may have been hiding. But behind the grief was another emotion, not at the fact that something had happened, but at the person investigators believed was responsible, which is her husband, the father of her children. The man who, according to friends, had shown signs of control and anger long before this happened. When word got out that Jossimar had taken the kids and fled to Peru, everything changed. What started as a local investigation suddenly spread across borders. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office immediately filed an extradition warrant, a process that involves intense scrutiny, multiple agencies, and cooperation between countries. It takes patience, precision, and oftentimes victims don't have. Meanwhile, in Peru, local authorities spotted him. He was brought in for questioning, but because the formal paperwork hadn't arrived yet, they had to let him go. It was a moment investigators described as frustrating but expected. International cases rarely unfold cleanly, but the escape didn't last long. Days later, in the capital city of Lima, Jossimar walked into a police station on his own. He surrendered. No one knows if it was guilt, pressure, or fear that pushed him through those doors. What matters is that he didn't walk back out. He was taken into custody, and that's where he stayed while the extradition process kept moving forward. Back in California, the community was still grappling with the reality of what happened. At a time when they should have been planning school pickups and weekend activities, Sheylla's children were instead placed into protective custody. Eventually, they were returned to their family in Southern California, surrounded by relatives who promised to protect them from further trauma. At the same time, prosecutors began building their case. They reviewed surveillance footage, phone records, travel logs, interviews, and statements from friends and neighbors who described a history of abuse and loud arguments. It was obvious that the truth was becoming clearer because what happened to Sheylla wasn't just random. It wasn't the act of a stranger lurking in the shadows, but an act of someone she knew, someone she trusted, who should have protected her, but instead became the source of her greatest danger. As the case gained attention, people across the country began talking about the warning signs of domestic violence. The isolation, the control, the quiet soberness victims often carry, and the way they minimize their fear, hoping things will eventually change at last. Although people in an abusive relationships plan to leave, they are often stopped by fear, financial pressure, or the hope that the person they love will somehow return to who they once were. It's a conversation that is painful but necessary, because Sheylla is not only the woman whose story ended this way. While investigators waited for Peru to approve Jossimar's transfer, the vigil for Sheylla continued to grow. As her friends held candles and photographs, they prayed, cried, hugged each other in a circle, and spoke her name with a mixture of love and anger. Her mother told reporters she wished she had acted sooner. She wished she had insisted Sheylla stay with her, and that she had somehow found the words to convince her daughter that danger was not a possibility, but a reality. But guilt is a heavy shadow that follows survivors, even when it isn't theirs to carry. As the months went on, the case became one of the most talked about domestic violence tragedies in the region, as advocates began pushing for more resources, more education, and more support for those trying to escape abusive homes. They used Sheylla's story to raise awareness, hoping her life would lead to change the way so many tragedies before have. Her case now stands as a reminder of how dangerous silence can be, how important it is for friends and family to always check in, and how quickly a home can shift from a place of comfort to a place of danger. Investigators say what haunts them most is not the footage, but the knowledge that Sheylla might have been reaching out for help. Probably she might have been planning to speak up, and that she ran out of time before she could. Her story continues because her children deserve answers, her family deserves closure, and her community deserves the truth. Today, people still look back on Sheylla's case with disbelief. A case that feels like something pulled from the darkest corner because Sheylla deserved more time and more opportunities to step into a future she never got to see as her life was cut short. But her story isn't gone. Sheylla Cabrera was a mother, a daughter, a friend, and a woman who just wanted a safe life for herself and her kids. But what happened to her was devastating. And her story shows how much can happen behind closed doors without anyone realizing the danger. If this case touched you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, share the video, and turn your notifications so you don't miss the next story, because cases like Sheylla's remind us why paying attention matters and why we need to look out for the people who might be too scared to speak up. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.